Okay, I just wanted to update you on progress that we've made with the piano today. So obviously we put the wire back on the piano and that's very elastic. I think that's what, that F sharp. It is holding right now and I've stretched it a number of times here, but most likely it's still just going to be very elastic and need a touch-up. I am not certain if I'm encountering the same symptom that the previous technician was as far as things floating on me because of the crack in the steel plate. And just to be extra cautious, I'm definitely going to apply the epoxy because it seems like it could be a factor. It doesn't seem like the leading contender of causes to me, but usually on a piano, it's never one thing. It's a bunch of contributing factors. Also, the way that I'm hearing it detune itself seems a little inconsistent with the crack in the plate, mainly in that I'd expect things to go flat, and that area in question is kind of going sharp. And so it's a little inconclusive. It's not a common problem that you see, so I'm going to do the epoxy just to try and add a little bit of reinforcement and see if we can make some headway, or if we need to think around that problem from another direction. But the piano is holding, possibly over tension, so to me that means it's going to hold. We just have to figure out if there is any give in the steel or not, and if we can minimize it. Part of the problem that I'm having with settling the wire is delivering maximum force to the wire. So I have to knock the piano into tune so that you can't destabilize it with a normal musician's dynamics. And what's happening there is, you can imagine if I was stretching a rubber band over my finger, there'd be a lot of stretch rubber band here and not much stretch rubber band there. And I'm using maximum force to the speaking length, this portion of our metaphor, to equalize any tension. Any latent motion gets pulled out by this maximum force. That's what's happening on the steel. Is the first piece of wire to move is between the pin and the beginning of the pressure plate, the beginning of the termination of the speaking length. And so I have to really knock it into tune to pull any latent motion out. And I'm unable to really deliver maximum force to the piano because of these dynamic issues that I'm encountering. So there are any number of keys that are not repeating. And that is, to me, there's two main reasons for that. One is the piano is still settling to the floor, and we've also locked into this polar vortex weather. So the air is a lot drier and the wood has constricted to a degree. So the combination of the piano settling to the floor and the dry air means that there's no lost motion between these components, and there's no clearance for the rooms, for the components to re-engage. The mechanism of the piano is essentially a miniature catapult. You're shooting the hammer at the string and catching and reloading it. The hammer is the ammunition, and the miniature catapult's called a weapon. And it's a state-of-the-art miniaturization when the piano was invented, but it's an exceedingly simple contraption. Essentially, you have a capital L-shaped firing pin of our miniature catapult, and this is called the jack. And the head of the jack is really what's moving the hammer. At some point, so we have to shoot the catapult at the string, or the string has no room to ring. That's called escapement. So the jack is responsible for escapement. The weapon, the miniature catapult, moves the jack up. That moves the hammer forward, and then at some point, the toe of the jack is tripped. I should be doing it this way. The toe of the jack is tripped. The head of the jack rotates out of the way. The hammer strikes the string and rebounds. It gets caught. So if we were in the way, the string would have no room to ring. Escapement is the jack rotating. The jack rotates back into place on an upright once there's clearance between the parts. So once the key starts coming up, then there's enough room, the jack can re-engage underneath the hammer and you get to repeat the strike. So I'm not getting enough lost motion in between those components. Every upright has a tiny bit of wink in the keys before you really engage the mechanism. And some of these, most likely from the move, possibly contributing factors of the weather, Some of these don't have any lost motion, so the jack is trying to get back underneath, and there's no clearance for the head of the jack to get back underneath. So a little bit of lost motion will allow the jack back underneath so that it can re-engage for the next strike. So that's one of the major factors that I can't repeat. The other is the jack return spring. I got to do it this way again. So the jack is tripped out of the way, and then in order to get back to its firing position, there's a return spring underneath the toe of the jack. And it seems like in some cases with this piano, the return spring is very weak. And on a normal upright piano, that's a super simple repair. It's right in front of you. Yours is a drop action console, and so not only are the springs much smaller, they're also much harder to reach. But I do think the technicians who built this had a bit of a workaround in that their method of attaching the back of the keys to the whip-in seems like it could be released enough to get a tool in there from underneath to strengthen the spring, but I haven't experimented with that. So these two things, the jack not having enough lost motion or clearance to get back underneath the hammer, and a weak return spring, is causing a lack of repetition in the piano. And that affects whether or not we can stabilize the instrument, because like I said, I've got to be able to knock it with maximum force. And if the hammer isn't really re-engaged by the jack, if the jack isn't locking back into place in order to do the hammer again, then I can't be assured that I'm getting maximum force. I could be pushing off the side of the hammer or not fully engaged to where I need to be in order to apply all that force into the action. So introducing some lost motion is not hard. Strengthening the jack springs is a little experimental, but I think it's doable on the piano, both of which seem like the next real step is to try to get the touch response back. Like I said, I am going to epoxy that area, and we'll just have to see how the tuning settles. So I think, there's no reason not to play this piano, but certainly the tuning's not fantastic, and we're going to get better tunings as we go along. But I think that the lack of stability has more to do with inadequate force reaching the wire than it does with the steel plate. But I'm going to epoxy anyway, just because if it's a contributing factor, we might as well do whatever we can to eliminate it.